Hello, everyone. This is the Faithful Life Podcast. I'm Matt Jacobson of FaithfulMan.com.
And I'm Lisa Jacobson of Club31Women.com. We're so glad you're here with us.
At Faithful Life, we explore what it means to be a biblical Christian in today's world, in our marriage, parenting, church, and culture.
It's real, raw, and relevant.
So let's get started. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Faithful Life Podcast.
Hello, everyone.
Really stoked you're here today. We're going to have a great discussion about a super important topic between married couples and how they interact with other people who are not their spouses, men and women. So we're going to get into that in a minute, but there's something we want to report that we're really excited about. The podcast is really growing, and we've gotten so many encouraging communications from you, and many of you have DM'd us and just told us how this has been impacting you. But what we've seen is everybody's been sharing this podcast with others, and it's really growing. And so that's fun. You know, when you put in the work, when you put in the time, when you want to share your heart with other people, it's actually super encouraging to see the various ways that people are responding.
Yeah, a number of couples have written in that the husband is listening to it and the wife is listening to it, and then they come home in the evenings, they're sharing together their thoughts about it, some of the ideas that it's prompted. So that was really fun to hear.
Well, and several people have written in and said, hey, our whole family listens.
That's right.
So,
that's
which, you
really
know,
fun.
We're going to have to say you better pay attention because every once in a while probably get a little frisky.
Okay.
So you want to watch for that. But yeah, that's just great. Super encouraging. Thank you so much for those of you who are sharing it on social media, whatever you're doing, wherever you're sharing, how you're talking about it, how you're sharing it with friends. Thank you. Really appreciate that. So, all right, babe, what are we diving into today?
Okay, so today, like you said, an important topic, and it could be considered a bit controversial, just depending on your perspective, but it has to do with emotional faithfulness and not just physical faithfulness. We all know adultery is 100% wrong, right? It's commandment number 7 on the Big Ten list.
Yeah, it's like a line in the sand.
Yeah, but there's another kind of infidelity, so to speak, that's all too common among Christian men and women, especially in this day and age, where people are either unknowingly, innocently, or maybe even not so much being drawn toward friendships, deep friendships with the opposite sex.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that the world looks at that and says, hey, that's super healthy. You need to develop friendships with others and certainly with the opposite sex as a part of just healthy, normal emotional growth as a person, as an adult. And that's the world's perspective on that. You know, it reminds me, frankly, of a story, actually an occurrence that happened in my own experience. It was before we were married. I was involved in this church, and it's kind of a traditional church. So there was a choir director, and there was a woman who played the piano. And of course, the choir director and the pianist, they have to interact for a bit. And so they did. And you know, to get the job done, to do a good job on Sunday morning, you kind of have to spend some time together and work out the music and how it's going to be arranged and all of that. And they just developed this really comfortable, close working relationship. And they just began to share little bits of their life with each other. And one thing led to another. It was an incremental process over time. But then there was a conference in Seattle for this specific kind of music presentation. And so church thought it was a good idea to send them both up there together. And you know, certainly you want everybody who's directly involved to be there to get the information and to grow professionally, right? Well, they grew in another way too. They grew closer and closer and closer. In fact, they fell in love with each other. They came home. They divorced both of their spouses. They both had kids. All right, these were both homes with young kids. Divorced their spouses, got married, and left this wake of shipwreck in their as they went forward. I mean, it just was awful, the results of it. And the thing is of course that's one anecdotal story, but it's just reminiscent of this whole idea of involving yourself, developing this close relational tie with a person who is not your wife, who is not your husband. And
just so you understand, Matt and I are not coming from a perspective like we're the only, you know, he has no friends that happen to be women. I have no friends that are men, but we have dear friends of both sexes. It's just that, so be mindful when we're sharing what we're talking about and what we're not talking about. And really from the beginning of our marriage, we understood, we had to just realize that, you know, as much as you want to say, oh, that could never happen to us, that we had to realize that our marriage wasn't immune to this possibility, even though we hated to think of it that way. And that we needed to be vigilant so that we wouldn't be giving pieces of our heart to others.
You know, that's actually a really good phrase, because that's really what you're doing when you dive deep with another person on an emotional level. You're giving a piece of your heart to that person. You're becoming emotionally entangled with somebody who isn't your spouse. And again, the world encourages this. I mean, you're not going to get any sideways glances from the world on something like this. But is this right? Is this true? Is this good? Is this okay? Is it a biblical perspective? You know, frankly, how many divorces start with a casual, positive relationship with someone else's spouse, right? That's the beginning of this long journey called separation and divorce. You know, we're inclined to think, not me, just like you were saying, we're inclined to think, hey, I'm untouchable. I'm committed. This can't get to me. I am above getting emotionally entangled with somebody else's husband or wife. And in the beginning, it is actually really difficult to get yourself to believe that your marriage could be severely compromised or even destroyed. Like the idea of, like right now, everybody listening, could your marriage right now be destroyed by your spouse's relationship with another person? Most of us listening, I think, would say, I don't think so. We're pretty strong. But I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that either have experienced this or can totally see that it could happen. They see that wandering heart.
Or been close to somebody that has.
Or been close, known somebody, certainly, that has had that. So, and it all starts out subtly, right? It all starts out with multiple lunch meetings at the office, maybe multiple connections at the gym, workout programs, at a church meeting, just like the true story that I told. It starts out subtly. It starts out with something that seems benign, something that seems just okay.
Yeah, but what we're talking about is not fear-based, it's wisdom-based. We're talking about protecting your marriage, not running from relationships, not walking around in fear or anxiety, but just like you would face a lot of how you'd want to protect any dear relationship. You want to make sure that it's looked after, that there's no holes or vulnerabilities as much as you're able.
Well, absolutely. And I really like the fact that you brought up that we do have a lot of relationships between us with the opposite sex. It's just that we don't have those independently of each other. We're not pursuing something that isn't part of our integrated life together, part of our emotional life together. So, you know, when I think of people like Kyler and Kayla, for instance, you have a Kyler loves you. You've got a close relationship with. I've got a close relationship with Kayla. When I think of Kurt and Issa Ferris, when I think of Isaac and Angie Tolpin, and we could go through the whole list. When I think of the Cherms, you know, we have a close relationship as individuals with those other spouses of the opposite sex, but we don't have those relationships independently of each other. It's an integrated part of our life together.
Yeah.
And what we need to remember in this whole process of how it happens kind of subtly and something you don't really see coming, the fact of the matter is that your enemy, my enemy, and everybody listening out there, the enemy of your marriage is a patient incrementalist. All right? Satan is a patient incrementalist.
Okay, so what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, essentially, Satan has a goal for your marriage. He wants it destroyed. He literally wants you to be completely ineffective for the purpose that God identified for your marriage, which is a representation of how Jesus Christ loves the church. It's a precursor to somebody understanding how much God loves them and the gospel of Jesus Christ. Your marriage is the first gospel that many people are going to encounter. Satan wants to take that marriage. He wants to destroy it. And he doesn't care if that happens in 5 minutes, 5 months, or 5 years. He is a destroyer, but he's a patient incrementalist. He's not going to present you with the worst possible outcome and say, hey, how about it? You want to dive in there? Nobody wants that, right?
Right.
He's going to present you with a completely benign option, something that nobody would identify as dangerous, and we'll just take one little step. See, he's interested in the goal and the destination of this journey, and he's going to make the first few steps seem completely benign. He's a patient incrementalist.
So with that in mind, we have to take responsibility for ourselves. You have to be mindful of who you are and what this relationship really means. And frankly, the dangers, the vulnerabilities that you have. So, for instance, Matt is a very empathetic listener, and he's a truth teller, but he's also very empathetic. He's a really good listener. So, honey, you have to be aware that gift that you have to care for and understand someone can also be very, very attractive, frankly, to a woman. And since we women tend to be very emotional creatures, we not only love being cared for and we want to be listened to, we're drawn to people who communicate that kind of care. And so I think for you, you have to be just mindful of that effect that you could have on someone who was in a vulnerable place.
Every adulterous thought or every adulterous moment starts with casual contact, right? It doesn't start at the end of the journey. It starts at the beginning. It starts with casual contact. Nobody ever woke up and decided out of the blue, you know what, I think I'll just end my marriage today. The journey from I do to I don't, that's a long journey. The journey from the wedding day to the decision to end the marriage, that's a long journey. It starts with an incremental approach. And the fact of the matter is we need to recognize that we're not immune to this journey that many have traveled, this journey of destruction that many have traveled, and we need to recognize that we're not immune to it, and we need to be vigilant in that way. Now, what is the person, babe, I would just ask you, what should the person do? Like, say a woman is getting this kind of understanding, attention, and care of her heart from somebody at work who just is willing to take the time and is willing to listen, and she just finds herself being drawn to that. What do you say to that wife? Maybe she's got a husband that isn't really emotionally available to her.
Well, as hard as it is, you actually need to, I believe, cut off that relationship and pull away from it, even run from it. And I know I say that with sympathy. It's not without compassion, but the danger of that situation is just too obvious. And instead, you get to go home and do the hard work of building that with your own husband. For as hard as that situation is, you have to do the hard work of going home and building that with your own husband and doing that hard work of drawing him out, of asking him to listen and being content with who he is and how God made him. If he's not a particularly, maybe he's not a great listener, and we're going to talk about this at the end of this, so don't give up all hope, right? We're going to be addressing some of these things, but it's far better to build what you can with who you have than to find it from someone outside of your marriage.
Well, and Satan's always going to offer a counterfeit to God's best for you. And a lot of times God's best for us isn't the ideal that we imagine, because God's got a lot of work to do in our hearts as well. In fact, he's got far more to do in us than through us, as Dr. John Houston always used to say. But this is the same for men, what you described, same for men, same thing. Maybe he tried to talk about work at home and she didn't want to hear about it. But hey, he's at work and he's talking with somebody who understands his world and is kind of entering in to the particular concerns and things that he cares about. It's the exact same thing. Someone at work, someone at the gym, someone at church, right? Like the story I told at the beginning, right? It can happen anywhere. The context is really, frankly, irrelevant. It can happen anywhere. And we need to recognize that this can happen to us, and our job, our responsibility is to seek out the relationship with the spouse that God gave us. So,
protecting your marriage is something you need to do before the situation presents itself, because once you're in that situation, once you have already started developing that relationship, you can be clouded emotionally from what's really going on. And that's something also that happens far too frequently.
Well, and it's a place that we don't make proper decisions, right? When we do get clouded and entangled emotionally with somebody else and wind up being concerned about feelings that God didn't want you to have entangled with that other person in the first place. And again, there's another story that we have, and we asked our friends if we could tell this story, and they said yes, because they came through it in a way that, and God really blessed their marriage and their family through it. But what had happened in the beginning is we had heard that one of our friends' wife was meeting with somebody in the park and hanging out. And it turns out he worked at night, and so he slept during the day, so she wanted to get the kids out of the house. See, it's all very logical, right?
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense. And frankly, there was nothing untoward in terms of the subject matter or anything like that. It's just Lisa and I were looking at the feature-length movie, not the snapshot, right? The snapshot looked fine. Perfectly benign conversation. She's in the park with this man. He's got his kids because his wife is at work, and he had worked a different shift. So they're together, sharing life together in the park with their kids, playing, talking, and
Grabbing a coffee, sharing about
it's all just
the frustrations
perfectly
of
easy. So we'd
kids.
heard about this, and we just thought, you know what, we really need to mention something about this because it's a very bad path to walk. It's a very, there's it's fraught with so many potential dangers, and we knew that it was not God's way. And so then we were at a restaurant, and in walks our friend with her daughter and son, and then in this other guy shows up. I took one look at that and I thought, well, that's strange. And then didn't Hawken?
Yeah, he came up to me and
our
just
son
said, why
Hawken,
is
who's
she
very
with
young,
him?
said what?
Why is she with him?
Right. So our kids, and I think we had 3 of them there at the time, are looking at this going, this, like, something's off kilter. It's not right. So anyway, turns out, and it was the first time that I'd met this man. It was it was the same man that she had been hanging out with at the park. And at that point I thought, you know what? I just have to say something. This isn't healthy. This isn't right. This isn't good. And so I went to the husband and I laid this out in terms of their relationship growing together and the real mistake of giving pieces of your heart to somebody else and how over time that could really entangle the relationship. Well, the scales fell from their eyes. They saw it all of a sudden. They just saw this clearly, and they recognized they had to make a very difficult change. Because what do you do now that you're in that situation and you've got this person that you've been hanging out with, and then all of a sudden it's not okay? But if you're in this situation, we plead with you, make the tough choice now. And the fact of the matter is you can be kind about it. And you can just say, hey, we've had a change in perspective on what's right in terms of the investment that we're making in people who are not our spouses. And so you can talk in a kind way. You can let the person know that you don't hate them, you're not against them, you're not down on them, but God has given you a new perspective. So God bless this family. Their marriage has never been better. Their parenting has never been better. Their family's never been stronger because they said no to Satan's offering of a path that leads away from marital unity and fidelity. And Hebrews 3:13 says, but exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin.
Okay, so what exactly do you think, what does that mean, the deceitfulness of sin in that?
Well, the thing is that I think that we often look at the big sins and we go, oh yeah, I'm not going over there. You know, we walk through the barnyard of life and we say, I'm not stepping in that cow pie. Steer around that mess, you know?
Yeah.
Right. Those are the big sins that we identify. But then there's all of these other, I think what we would probably even consider lesser kinds of roadblocks and hurdles and things that compromises, things that trip us up. And one thing leads to another, and sin, you just commit maybe a little bit of a sin. You give a little bit of your heart to somebody else. You walk this path a little bit. And sin, the Bible says, is deceitful, right? So don't let your heart be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. This is what sin does. It deceives you, hardens your heart a little bit. A little more sin deceives you more, hardens your heart more. Don't let that happen. In fact, there's a real urgency in this verse, too, that we shouldn't miss. It says, exhort one another daily. All right. So that means, man, we're staying on top of this, right? It means if you see something, just it daily. We're literally walking with each other, loving each other, and being vigilant for each other. And it says, exhort one another while it is called today. So take care of it right away. Take care of it when you see it, when it's identified. Don't wait. Don't wait. Satan will use sin over time to harden your heart. And the more your heart is hardened, the more deceitful sin becomes. And you start believing a lie. You start believing that things that are not okay in your relationship, in how you've entangled yourself with a person who isn't your spouse, you start believing that's okay. And that's how the deceitfulness of sin works to entangle and trip us up.
Yeah, because when you share at a heart level with someone who is not your husband or wife, you've basically invited a third person into the oneness that God has established in your marriage. That's what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not a trinity.
Right.
It's not a threesome.
No.
All right. So I've got a question for you. In Proverbs 4:34, it says, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. So guard your heart. This is a direct instruction, a direct warning, which is implied in that statement. Guard your heart. Well, why would you need to guard your heart? Because your heart will be under assault in this world. That's the point of this verse. It's not just, hey, something randomly could happen. No, live in the state of guarding your heart. Walk that way, because your heart will be under assault in this world.
And it doesn't mean you can't have deep and caring relationships, like we've mentioned, with the Christian brothers or sisters you are walking with. But context and boundaries are extremely important, and they have to be established before you get to that moment. And I don't know, maybe you're super strong and you don't think, oh, I'm not tempted at all by something like this. But something to keep in mind is maybe you're the one that's strong, but what about that other person? And have you thought about the possibility that the other person will be tempted or affected by what you're sharing and pouring into?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just so awful in terms of how Satan can take a genuine care and concern and then turn it into something terrible by misusing it in the life of another person, tempting them to sin. You know, evangelist Billy Graham was known to never get in an elevator by himself with a woman other than his wife. And I remember the media used to mock him for this. What a prude, you know, oh my goodness, he can't ride in an elevator. Are you kidding me? Like every woman's going to go for you. But that wasn't the point. The point is that he was going to walk above reproach, and he was going to make sure that he was never even in the possibility of being in a compromising situation in an elevator with another woman. And, you know, you just look at their marriage over decades, the faithfulness, and absolutely true to each other.
And in today's,
Awesome.
you know, tragic scenarios
Right.
of one pastor falling after another, I applaud them
You
for
can't
their
criticize it.
Yeah,
You
for their
just can't.
carefulness.
It's awesome. So, babe, what are some of the boundaries that we've established to protect our marriage from the road that leads to distance and emotional entanglements?
Okay, well,
Emotional adultery is another way to say that.
right. They're pretty straightforward. We basically believe that we will not have any separate relationships with the opposite sex, and no one-on-one travel with someone who's of the opposite sex. So if you're going on a business trip, you're not going to go with another woman, and vice versa.
In today's world, that's kind of tough.
I know, but there are actually ways to get around it if you're committed to it. And even on for the same principle, no one-on-one business meetings with the opposite sex, not spending private committed time with someone who's not your spouse.
Mm-hmm.
So this reminds me of that one gal that you worked with real closely in on business level for a couple of years. And the more we got to know her and her tragic marriage situation, just married to someone awful, and you were very sympathetic and you felt so badly for her, and often just tried to be there for her and encourage her because you really admired her. She was so sharp and interesting, lovely person. And in the beginning, I was okay with that because it was you and I together. But as time went on, I came to you and I just said, I don't think you would ever commit adultery. But if you were going to, it'd probably be with someone like her. It would be her.
Yeah, you specifically said it would be with her. And I looked at you, and what did I say?
You said I was right on both counts, really.
On both counts. A, you're right. If I was going to commit adultery, it would be with somebody like that. And B, I would never commit adultery. Like I would never do it. That was my belief. That was my commitment. That was my line in the sand. I would never go there.
But
right?
we made some changes based on my concerns.
But we made some changes based on your concerns. And frankly, I wanted to honor your concerns. In this case, I didn't feel like listen to me talk, people. I am telling you the honest truth. I didn't feel like I was vulnerable. I didn't feel like I could be drawn in. I didn't feel like I would let myself. And I still tell myself I believe that. But because we've seen so many shipwreck circumstances over the years, we've learned that we don't get to trust that belief. We just get to change our behavior and walk in the safety of those boundaries.
Let alone looking out for her as a Christian sister, because here she was in a vulnerable place. She was in a very hurtful, even almost dangerous marriage, and you were a kind person supporting her, sympathizing with her. And that put her in a place of temptation.
Yeah, that's so absolutely true. And the fact of the matter is what you described a minute ago in terms of the things that we put in place, we actually implemented those very particularly.
Yeah, because when Matt was a publisher, he had lots of meetings with female authors. And sometimes, you would invite them to the house, but sometimes that wouldn't work out because you guys had lots of things to talk about. And our house was full of kids, so it was noisy. So you'd have a dinner meeting. But what we decided on was that you would never go alone in that situation. You'd grab a kid or maybe another colleague or myself if I was available, but I wasn't always available. But it was never one-on-one.
Yeah. And the thing is, we find that when we establish these kinds of boundaries, people actually respect them. You don't have to worry about the fact that, somebody's going to think, oh, that's so idiotic. All right. Most of you aren't going to be like Billy Graham, a public person, where he's got this negative media scrutiny on him. But the people that are in your circle, even unbelievers who are in the workplace, they're going to respect you for this. And they're going to say, wow, that dude, that woman, really, really wanting to protect their marriage. You gotta, congratulate them for that. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I would say 100% of the time that's been our experience, that the other person who has unknowingly maybe crossed some of those boundaries because that's what they're used to or the culture they've been steeped in. But when we've kindly, graciously said something that's not the way we do it, it's been actually very positive.
It's been a positive thing.
And very respectful.
So I have a question for the men, and frankly, I'm going to turn it around for the ladies too. But I've got a question right now for you. If your wife feels the need to go and find some emotional sustenance, some emotional care for her heart and for her feelings, if she feels the need to find that somewhere else, don't you want to ask yourself the question why that is? Don't you want to pursue that? Don't you want to get to the bottom of that? And the same thing with the wives. If your husband is finding a ready ear somewhere else, don't you want to ask yourself how you got to that place? How he got to that place where he's just going to go and find somebody else to listen to him? We really need to take stock of our circumstances and of our contribution to the circumstances, right? And it's often a complicated situation. It's never one-sided, almost never one-sided. But we need to take inventory of ourselves and ask, what have I done to contribute to the distance in the relationship, and pursue getting back on track and protecting your marriage with some of these safeguards that we've talked about?
Well, this has been a great conversation. I know it's not always easy to talk about these things, but isn't it better to talk about them and to grow in wisdom and set up these things to protect your marriage for the rest of your lives together?
No, it absolutely is. You will never regret doing this. And so we're going to ask everybody right now that's listening, we're going to say, will you take a moment with your spouse, do it together? Or if there's a lot of distance, maybe you just need to do it by yourself, and you and God, just drill down and pursue this with the Lord and ask him to lead you through it. But will you take inventory of the relationships that you have right now and ask yourself, are we cultivating relationships with the opposite sex? And what are their names? Who are these people? All right. It doesn't mean they are bad people. They're probably really good people. But are you willing to ask yourself, who am I doing this with right now? Am I doing this? Take stock, take inventory of your circumstance, and ask the Lord to speak to you about the right approach going forward, to put appropriate boundaries up and to respect your husband, respect your wife, and to protect your marriage. It's about respect and protection.
Okay. Ready for today's takeaways?
Absolutely.
All right. 1, avoid emotional adultery. Be faithful in every way to your spouse.
Yeah, you don't give pieces of your heart to other people. Remember, number 2, remember, Satan is a patient incrementalist. He's happy to do this incrementally. Remember the frog boiling 1 degree at a time, doesn't know it's being boiled? Same thing, walking away from your marriage. Satan is a patient incrementalist. Don't forget that.
3, guard your heart. Be careful with what you do with your heart and where it goes.
And 4, define and establish the relational boundaries for your marriage. This isn't going to look the same in every marriage, but there's going to be some fundamental things that are the same in every marriage. And the bottom line is, we don't allow ourselves to become emotionally entangled with people who are not our spouses.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. We've really enjoyed the conversation as always. And just as a reminder, please leave a 5-star review if you've enjoyed this podcast. Share it on social media. Share it with your friends and family. We're always blessed when you do that.
That's a huge help. Thank you. And thanks for being with us today. We really appreciate you joining us.
Remember, our God is our rock and our Redeemer.
He already knows what this week holds for you, and He knows exactly what you're facing.
He loves you and is for you.
So draw near to God this week, and He will draw near to you.